The microphone hummed with that distinct, high-pitched whine of cheap electronics. It was the only sound in a room filled with 2,000 people. But the silence wasn't respectful. It was heavy. It was dangerous. The man standing at the podium was the most famous actor on planet Earth. He was a titan, a god of the silver screen. But on this night, in the smoky haze of a crowded auditorium, he wasn't a movie star. He was a target. There were men in the back of the room with badges hidden under their jackets. There were people in the front row with hatred burning in their eyes. The air was thick with the threat of violence, the kind of tension that usually ends with a gunshot or a riot. He had prepared a speech. He had prepared to fight the entire system with his words. But then he saw her. In the middle of the hostile sea of faces, one woman was breaking. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't cheering. She was weeping, silently, her body shaking with a grief that seemed to carry the weight of a century. And the biggest star in Hollywood did something that wasn't in the script. He didn't shout. He didn't continue his tirade. He stopped. He walked off the podium. He walked into the crowd, and he whispered something to her that the microphones didn't catch. A few words that would change the trajectory of that night, and perhaps his entire life. For 40 years, people wondered what passed between them in the eye of that storm. Here is the story. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to understand the world in 1973. This wasn't the sanitized corporate Hollywood we know today. The early 70s were raw. They were bleeding. The dream of the 60s of peace and love and flower power had died a violent death. In its place was a cold, hard cynicism. The Vietnam War was tearing the country apart at the seams. Watergate was breaking on the nightly news. Trust in authority had evaporated. And out in the American West, a fire was burning that most of America was trying desperately to ignore. The American Indian movement was rising up, demanding justice for treaties broken and lives lost. It was a time of jagged edges. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and tear gas. If you were a celebrity in 1973, you were expected to smile, wave, and sell tickets. You were a product. You weren't supposed to have a soul, and you certainly weren't supposed to have an opinion. And then there was Marlon. By 1973, Marlon Brando had done the impossible. A few years prior, he was considered box office poison. The studios wouldn't touch him. They said he was difficult, bloated, washed up. Then came The Godfather. In one sweeping motion, he reclaimed his throne. He was Don Corleone. He was the king. But the public saw only the resurrection. They didn't see the man behind the tuxedo. While the world was worshiping him again, Brando was looking at his Oscar, looking at his fame, and feeling absolutely nothing but disgust. He saw the golden statue not as an achievement, but as a shackle. He was tired of the applause. He was tired of the shallow adoration of people who didn't care about the things that kept him awake at night. He had been reading. He had been listening. He had learned about the systematic destruction of Native American culture, the massacres, the starvation, the forced assimilation. And it was eating him alive. While Hollywood was preparing to crown him king again at the Academy Awards, Brando was planning a mutiny. We all know about Sachin Littlefeather. We know about the refusal of the Oscar. That is the moment history recorded. But something is about to happen that history tried to forget because the cameras turned off. The ceremony ended, but the fight didn't. In the days and weeks following that ceremony, while the press mocked him and the industry shunned him, Brando didn't retreat to his private island. He went deeper into the fire. He started showing up where he wasn't wanted. He was heading toward a collision, a specific rally, a specific moment of human connection that would strip away the celebrity and reveal the man. He didn't know this decision would nearly destroy his career for a second time. He didn't care, but here's what nobody knew at the time. While Brando was traveling to these protests, the FBI was watching. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented fact. There were files. There were agents monitoring his bank accounts and his travel. The government was terrified of what would happen if the most powerful voice in culture united with the most oppressed people in the nation. The stakes weren't just bad press. The stakes were freedom. Let's go back to the weeks immediately following the Oscars. The backlash was nuclear. Frank Sinatra was furious. John Wayne was reportedly restrained from storming backstage to drag Sacheen Littlefeather off the podium. The narrative in the press was vicious. They called Brando a coward. They said he sent a woman to do a man's job. They said he was mocking the Academy. But alone in his home on Mulholland Drive, Brando was in agony. He hadn't sent Littlefeather to shield himself. He sent her to give her a voice. And watching the abuse she received broke something in him. He realized that a symbolic gesture wasn't enough. He needed to be physically present. He began traveling to Washington State, to Wounded Knee, to anywhere the movement needed him. He wasn't staying in five-star hotels. He was sleeping on floors. He was sitting in circles listening to elders speak about the stealing of their children and the poisoning of their rivers. The tension was escalating. Every time Brando appeared at a rally, the crowds grew larger, but so did the danger. There were death threats mailed to his children. There were anonymous calls telling him his house would burn. His agents begged him to stop. "You've made your point, Marlon," they said. "Go back to making movies. Don't throw it all away." But Brando was stubborn. When the world pushed, he pushed back harder. He saw the hypocrisy of a nation that cheered for him, playing a fictional criminal in The Godfather, while vilifying him for supporting real people fighting for their survival. He arrived at a gathering in the Midwest, a dusty, overcrowded hall filled with tension. It was a fundraiser, a moment to rally support for the legal defense of Native leaders. The room was a powder keg. You had activists, curious locals, undercover agents, and angry detractors who believed the movement was un-American. To understand why this mattered so much to him, you have to look at his childhood. Decades earlier, in Nebraska, a young Marlon Brando watched his mother struggle with her own demons. He watched her fall apart. He knew what it felt like to be voiceless. He knew what it felt like to be judged. He wasn't looking at the Native struggle from a pedestal. He was looking at it through the lens of his own broken heart. The air in the hall was stifling, hot, claustrophobic. Brando was scheduled to speak. As he made his way to the front, the noise was deafening. Some people were shouting his name in adoration, treating him like a messiah. Others were shouting slurs. He looked tired. The weight of the world was in the bags under his eyes. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo now. He was in a simple shirt, sweat already forming on his brow. He stepped up to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. He adjusted the stand. He began to speak about justice, about the treaties. But he could feel the disconnect. The crowd was reacting to Brando the star, not the message. He was losing them to the spectacle of his own fame. He needed to break through the noise. He needed something real. Quick question. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely, utterly alone? Have you ever tried to tell the truth but felt like everyone was just watching your performance instead of hearing your words? That is a specific kind of hell. Let us know in the comments if you've ever felt that isolation. The shouting from the back of the room grew louder. A heckler yelled something about Brando being a traitor to his race. The security tensed up. Brando gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles turning white. He paused, letting the insult hang in the dead air. He looked to his left. Near the front, pushed up against the barrier, was a woman. She was older, her face lined with the map of a hard life. She wore traditional clothing that had seen better days, and she was crying. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't hysterical sobbing. It was a silent, steady stream of tears flowing down her cheeks. She was looking right at him, but she wasn't looking at the movie star. She was looking at the man. In her eyes, he saw the exhaustion of the entire movement. He saw the grief of mothers who had lost sons. But to understand what happened in that room, we need to step outside for a second. While this was happening, just a few hundred miles away, the FBI was conducting a siege. Supplies were being cut off to activists. Media blackouts were in effect. The people in that room knew that their friends and family were currently being starved out by their own government. This wasn't a celebrity meet and greet. This was a war zone. The woman crying? She wasn't crying because she was happy to see The Godfather. She was crying because she was terrified that her culture was dying. She was crying because hope felt like a dangerous thing to have. Back in the hall, Brando stopped speaking mid-sentence. The silence that followed was heavy. The hecklers stopped, confused by the sudden pause. Brando let go of the podium. He stepped away from the microphone. The organizers panicked. Where is he going? Is he leaving? Is he sick? He walked down the 3 steps of the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, confused, murmuring. The security guards tried to flank him, but he waved them off. He walked straight toward the woman. The room went deadly quiet. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. You could hear the shuffle of feet. Brando stopped directly in front of her. He was 6 feet away, then 2. He towered over her, but his posture wasn't dominant. It was submissive. He slumped his shoulders. He looked her in the eye. He reached out and took her hands. Her hands were rough, calloused. His were soft, manicured, the hands of an actor. But he held them tight. The cameras flashed, blinding white light exploding in the dim room, but he didn't blink. He didn't look away from her. Most people don't know this detail exists. If you look at the rare photos from this era, you can see the change in Brando's face. The mask is gone. If you've ever seen those photos, comment, "I see it," below. And in that moment, everything changed. The movie star vanished. He leaned in close. The room strained to hear. The microphones couldn't pick it up. The reporters leaned forward, pens poised, desperate for the soundbite. Was he apologizing? Was he giving her money? Was he whispering a political slogan? He brought his face inches from hers. She looked up, terrified and hopeful all at once. He whispered, "I don't have the power to stop your pain, but I promise you I will make the world watch it." It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a lie. It was a confession of his own limitations and a vow of his utility. He knew he couldn't fix the broken treaties. He knew he couldn't bring back the dead. But he knew he was a spotlight, and he was promising to turn that spotlight off of himself and onto her. She squeezed his hands. She stopped crying. She nodded, and for a fleeting second, amidst the chaos and the politics and the ego of Hollywood, there was just 2 human beings sharing the burden of a tragedy. Brando turned around and walked back to the stage. He didn't say another word to the crowd. He didn't need to. The energy in the room had shifted. The anger had deflated, replaced by a somber respect. He finished his appearance and left through the back door. But the moment stayed with him. That night, witnesses say Brando was uncharacteristically quiet. He didn't drink. He didn't rant. He sat in the back of a car, staring out the window at the passing darkness, haunted by the woman's face. He had made a promise, and unlike so many promises in Tinseltown, he intended to keep it. For years, nobody knew what he whispered. The press speculated. Some tabloids claimed he whispered something inappropriate. Others claimed he told her to stop crying because it looked bad for the cameras. Why was the truth hidden? Because the truth didn't fit the narrative. The media wanted Brando to be the crazy, eccentric recluse. They wanted him to be the villain who disrespected the Oscars. They didn't want the public to know that he was a man capable of profound, quiet empathy. The studios tried to bury his activism. They warned producers not to hire him. He's too political, they said. He's too much trouble. For a significant period, Brando was essentially shadow banned from the industry he helped build. He lost millions of dollars. He lost friends. The truth only came out decades later, pieced together from the memories of those who were close to the movement. When the stories were finally told, when the elders spoke about the actor who came to their aid, the picture changed. It wasn't a publicity stunt. Brando spent years funding legal defenses quietly. He bailed activists out of jail. He gave land back. He kept the promise he whispered in that crowded hall. He made the world watch, even when the world wanted to look away. Some people believe Brando ruined his career for nothing, that his activism didn't change enough to justify the cost. Others say it was the bravest thing an actor ever did. Which side are you on? Was it worth the sacrifice? Let us know what you think. Fast forward 20 years. An older, heavier Brando is interviewed by Larry King. He's asked about his movies. He waves his hand dismissively. The movies don't matter, he says. The acting is just a way to get the money to do the real work. The interviewer looks confused, but somewhere, perhaps that woman or her children, knew exactly what he meant. Marlon Brando was not a saint. He was a man of immense contradictions. He was difficult, womanizing, and often cruel to those closest to him. We cannot paint him as a perfect hero. That would be a lie, and Brando hated lies. But in that specific moment, in the heat of that hall, with the weight of expectation on his shoulders, he found a moment of pure truth. He recognized that his fame was a grotesque accident, but it was an accident he could use. He saw a woman in pain, and he didn't offer her a signed autograph. He offered her his witness. That whisper echoes today. Every time you see a celebrity use their platform for a cause, every time an acceptance speech turns into a plea for justice, you are seeing the ghost of Marlon Brando. He broke the mold. He smashed the idea that an actor should just sit up and sing. He died in 2004. The obituaries listed his Oscars. They listed The Godfather and On the Waterfront, but they barely mentioned the woman in the crowd. They barely mentioned the promise. So here is the question for you. If you had the attention of the entire world for just 5 minutes, and you knew that speaking the truth would cost you your career, would you do it? Or would you just say thank you and take the trophy? We like to think we'd be brave, but silence is comfortable, and comfort is addictive. Let us know in the comments which untold story should we cover next. The tragic final days of Montgomery Clift, or the secret war of Bogart and Bacall against the studio system. Marlon Brando is gone. The movies remain. But the story of the whisper, that belongs to the ages. And unfortunately, they don't make men like Marlon Brando anymore. Thanks for watching.